Hi, I'm Joel Richardson, and this is The Underground. Welcome to this episode of The Underground. This week we are joined by my good friend Jerry Maddox. Jerry and his family have been living and working among Muslims in the Middle East for over the past 14 years. Jerry's also the author of several books in Turkish, including a book which translates as The Last Days. In Turkish it's called Son Günler. He's also the author of a book in English called Dear Muslim Friend. Now, this is a book that I have been recommending far and wide. It's a book which answers all of the primary objections that Muslims have to biblical faith, and it really answers all of those objections. So it's a book that not only every Christian should read to educate themselves about these critical issues, but it's a book that was made to give away to Muslims. This is a book that everyone should have several of to give away to their Muslim friends, neighbors, and coworkers, and so forth. Jerry, thank you so much for coming on with us today.
Privileged to be with you.
All right. So let's just begin. Jerry, you worked in a local church in the southeastern province of Turkey, in Diyarbakir, the city of Diyarbakir, among the Kurds, among the Turks, among Arabs for over 12 years. But just about 2 years ago, you were really forced out of the country by the AK party, by the ruling government, in what was a fairly high-profile case. We're hearing a lot of stories of missionaries being pushed out of the country, of having their visas revoked after many years. Tell us, what do you think was behind this, you guys being pushed out as a family, and how does that relate to the present government in Turkey?
Well, first of all, I'm thankful, and we feel blessed that we were able to stay there the 12 years we were there. I mean, that for us is a miracle as it is, just because it has been historically very difficult for Christian workers to operate and to stay extended periods of times working in Muslim background countries. In this case, obviously, Turkey changed drastically. The Turkey that we went to almost 15 years ago now is very different than the one it is today. At that time, it was a Turkey that was trying to join the European Union, bringing in all kinds of democratic reforms, beefing up its secular status, and yet with the election at that point of the AK party, things began to change ever so slightly at the beginning. But then in the last 5 or 6 years, just incredible. It's been like an avalanche. Everything has changed dramatically. And so, this has been a large part of that. You have basically a country that initially was facing west, looking to become more democratic, now facing east and seeking to become, if you will, the renewed sultan of the Middle East and become specifically an Islamic country at its roots. And so if you're trying to establish or reinstate an Islamic empire, and then you have no place for someone like me who's a Christian worker or Bible teacher. So because of this, obviously, it became increasingly difficult and has become difficult for Christian workers all over the country, but particularly for us who are in the east part of the country where there's much fewer of us, much fewer churches, because it is a sensitive area. It's basically the Kurdish people reside, and there's always been conflagrations out there, all kinds of, things linked to terrorism and the like. And so because of that, it's always been difficult to even get a residence permit to stay out there. And then this, again, was used as an excuse to kick us out and to make it difficult for others as well to stay out there. So in the last 3 or 4 years, not just ourselves, but many others who have been serving out that region have been sent packing. Of course, we started a court case because we were accused of working illegally. We were accused of, many things, of which we didn't even know about. And so we opened a court case. And after a couple of years of trying to dig into this, our lawyer finally got 3 or 4 pages from the Turkish intelligence detailing what my high crimes are. One of them, as we expected, was that I was charged of aiding and abetting the Kurdish party, the PKK, being supportive of them, which we never did. We always steered clear of anything political, anything remotely, connected to terrorism. At the same time, what was interesting is that it claimed that I was overly critical of the government and the government's policies, in particular towards the Kurds. Well, this is ironic because obviously not just I, but much of Turkey is critical of the AK party and its stance towards many things, including the West and the Kurds. And so this is not unnatural. Obviously, every citizen in a democratic society has the right and even the responsibility to critique its own government. And yet this is now being turned on its head in Turkey, where any kind of criticism of the AK party or personally of the President Erdogan is treated with great disdain and treated almost as a high crime against the state. The year that we were kicked out, 2013, Turkey had the prestige of being the country that jailed the most journalists that year, and it hasn't slowed down much since. Right. It's gone on to jail even young students in school who dared to be critical of the government. This last year, just a week ago, I read sacked 118 police chiefs because they have, at different times tried to investigate the government or brought, any kind of dredged up any kind of charges against the administration. So you have an administration that is increasingly paranoid and against anybody that's going to be critical. And even though we were only mildly, if ever critical, never openly critical of the government, we just steer clear of politics. Just the fact that we lived out there, that we're Christians, that we're different, is enough of an excuse.
I'll tell you, I was amazed just a year ago when there was this big corruption scandal. And I mean, Erdogan was essentially caught red-handed, recorded on the phone, saying to his son, hide the money. He's got a house full of shoeboxes of money, which are all from illegal bribes. And, he's caught red-handed, and yet he was able to come out of that and still win a majority of the votes and pull ahead. So, I certainly wouldn't underestimate his tenacity and his resilience.
It's become a bit of a personality cult, too. People don't maybe realize that outside, but those that vote for him, he's been in power long enough now that they almost venerate and worship him. It's quite scary. I mean, we went to visit our neighbor across the way a couple months back, and we were just meeting them the first time and walked into their house, and it literally had the house filled with pictures of Erdogan. And I was shocked. You may have a favorite person or, a star or someone, but to put a politician on the wall, you got to be pretty serious. And not just one, several. Right? And people really think he's the long-lost champion of Islam and of Turkey. And so they really put him front and center.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm sure caught your attention, which was also last year at a big political rally, of course he has nonstop political rallies. We were actually able to attend a massive rally in Istanbul in 2013, just after they purged Taksim Square of all the protesters. And there was at least 500,000 people there. It was hard to describe. But one of the events was when a woman, similar to some of the events that took place during the election of President Obama, but this woman fainted during his speech, and he calls this woman up, and he kind of reaches out and lays hands on her, and she comes out of her fainting spell and starts screaming, Allahu Akbar, and he kind of waves her off as if he had just healed her or raised her from the dead or this sort of thing. And I've seen various statements by some of the AK party leaders that refer to him almost in divine terms, almost using terms that are reserved for Allah and applying them to Erdogan. So for me, when I look at the nationalism in Turkey, I see this commitment to the Turkish identity, the Turkic identity, in a way that most Americans really can't comprehend. And then when I see that cult of personality, that almost veneration of the leader of the party, I see an incredibly caustic and dangerous mix, but it's really hearkening back, and I know this is a dangerous comparison, but even some parallels to Nazi Germany with Adolf Hitler as really the Superman that was able to take this country out of its history of suffering and being second class and really bringing them forward to being the leaders in the world, or most certainly in the region. And that's I understand that can be an inflammatory comparison to make, but I don't think it's that far out, and it's really something that the world needs to be paying attention to.
Exactly, and I think it's potentially even more dangerous. And why do I say that? Because Hitler and all he did, as grotesque and terrible as it was kind of a one-time show. It arose not out of nowhere entirely, but he didn't really have much of a history, of a background, but he was able to create this identity, this idea, and run with it, and then it fizzled. But Islam, what Erdogan is working with is Islam, and this has a long history and heritage. We need to remember that the power of the Ottoman Empire, just up to years ago, the politics of the world were talked about in terms of Christendom and Islam. These are the two great major powers, and all throughout the Middle Ages, Islam was very wise, and they were knocking on the gates of Europe more than once. And for many Europeans, it was a foregone conclusion that the Ottoman Empire, the Islamic Empire, was going to overrun them at one point or another, and it was really miraculously they were saved. And it was only with kind of the downturn of the Ottoman Empire and their projection of industrialization and modernization that they ended up kind of going into the doldrums of decay. But for a long time, they had this massive empire that was wreaking havoc all over the world. And so this is what he has going on. He's got this incredible heritage that he's trying to revive. It was a real full-blown empire, the greatest the world ever saw. And this is what he's trying to revive, which is incredibly dangerous.
I agree with you. Good insights, Jerry. Listen, we're going to take a break, and we will be back right after this.
For this week's program, we are offering What Comes Next in the Middle East Bundle. This important resource bundle includes the following powerful 6 resources. Joel's newest teaching DVD, What Comes Next in the Middle East. This 3-session teaching DVD examines the 2 critical passages of Daniel chapter 8 and Isaiah 19, understanding what is happening right now in the Middle East and what may be next on the prophetic horizon. Second, you will receive the documentary film Better Friends Than Mountains, a film about ISIS, the Kurdish people, and the gospel of Jesus Christ. This beautifully made film will inspire and move you to learn what the Lord is doing right now in one of the world's most active crisis zones. Finally, you will receive 4 copies of Dear Muslim Friend. This highly recommended book answers all of the primary objections to biblical faith commonly brought up by Muslims. Not only is this a critical book for all Christians, but it was specifically created to give away to Muslims. Together, these items are valued at over $60. But when you purchase all 6 items at the discounted rate of only $50, you help support this ministry. Go to joelstrumpet.com and order the What Comes Next in the Middle East bundle.
Okay, welcome back. Jerry, one of the things, of course, that has caught the attention of the world the past year is the Islamic State, is ISIS. Again, this group that President Obama referred to just a few months before their big breakout was sort of the junior varsity of Al-Qaeda, nothing really to be worried about. But suddenly, in June of 2014, they just swarm out of Syria, sweep across northern Iraq in just a brutal, barbaric, genocidal blitzkrieg. But one of the elements of this story that not many people are really grasping is sort of this relationship between Turkey in terms of empowering ISIS. There's been so many reports of the Turkish government working with ISIS Is this something, again, you read and speak Turkish fluently, you're living in northern Turkish Cyprus. Is this something that you're seeing as well? Are you seeing the same reports? And what do you think is behind, what is Turkey's agenda with ISIS in the region?
Well, I think, in all fairness, we have to say that Turkey has been a major catalyst to the success of ISIS. Now, to be able to appreciate this, I think we need to kind of step back and realize the trajectory that Turkey has been undergoing in the last decade or so. I mean, a decade ago, it was the most staunchest supporter of not only America, NATO, and Western interests in the region. They were even the greatest ally of Israel in the region. And yet that changed very quickly with Erdogan and his policies. And we begin to get a bit of a flavor of this in the way he interacted with other leaders, especially Muslim leaders. You need to realize that up until a decade or so ago, Turks were infatuated with the European Union and with becoming more secular and democratic, even though they were still majorities, the overall majority Muslim. And yet they've done an about-face to where now they're in bed with Muslim leaders and even Arabs in the region, which is ironic because for Turks, Arabs has always been the pis Arab, the filthy Arabs. And it goes both ways. And yet now they're very much in bed with them. Now, interestingly, we have interesting dialogues between Erdogan and Gaddafi, for example, of Libya, or the president of Sudan, who was incriminated for genocide. And when people brought up the fact that these guys were, leaders that were tainted by terrorism, his response, what was this? A very telling response. They're Muslims. They couldn't have done that. And so this idea that, if you're Muslim, no, you're okay. Later on, of course, he offered a great deal of support, more than even any other Arab countries, to Gaza, to the point of really getting behind this whole Mavi Marmaras incident and taking it very personal. And being very willing to sour his not only with Israel, but with the West on account of this. Later on, after the Arab Spring, he was going to his form of Islamic democracy. And he was the one to get squarely behind Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a terrorist organization. So all along, he's been trying to drum up some sort of support for some sort of a cooperation, some sort of coordinated effort between these Muslim countries in the region, all along because he has this idea that he can reinvent or recreate, resurrect the Ottoman Empire of yesteryear, which is the hope of which is still very latent in the people here. So when it comes to Syria and what's happened there, this has been a real thorn in his side because Assad is Alawite, which means he is a Shia. It's not Sunni, and is very much supported by Iran, which is kind of the arch rival of Turkey. So you need to get rid of him somehow if you're hoping to form some sort of a coalition of Sunni countries. And so even though he at one point pretended to be very friendly with Assad, when the opportunity came for him to be dislodged, he was first up to bat, very eager to see this happen. And frankly, in all fairness, many Western countries were as well. And initially willing to support anyone who was going to be fighting against them. And many of them didn't realize that how long much time this would take, the tragedies it would bring to the region, and that this would become, breeding ground for terrorism in the form of ISIS as we see it today. And so early on, I think not just Turkey, but maybe even America was supporting some of these clandestine forces in hopes that they would take down Assad. But all along, Turkey has been tacitly veiled in a veiled way supportive of ISIS. For one, they refused to join any coalition against them. And even after they were kind of forced to do so, they still did not take up any active role. Their borders have always been porous, and they've allowed hundreds, if not thousands, of people to join ISIS, including many of their own citizens. So they've clearly facilitated this. And not only that, there was quite a bit of damning evidence that was found and used in the most recent elections, in which near the border down in Turkey, in Reyhan, near Antioch, a number of trucks carrying quite heavy armament and ammunition were sequestered, were caught by local police and the armed forces. And when this came to the fore, the central government quickly told them, you need to let these guys go. This is a covert operation. You have no business in this. And they forced them to allow those trucks through. Not only that, they later sacked these policemen and military forces, claiming that they were intervening in the government business when they were only doing their job, right? And so many, of course, of the politicians used this and brought this to the fore during the last elections. And Erdogan and his party still claim, well, it was tactical support to anti-Assad forces, but it was clearly headed to ISIS. And there's been a lot of support for, in a tacit way for ISIS, and just the fact that they were unwilling to get involved, even to protect innocent people that have been dying just across the border. They've been always reluctant to open their borders, even though they have at times. And they've been very happy for ISIS and the Kurdish Peshmerga, for example, to duke it out, because they don't care for the Peshmerga, just as they don't care for the Alawite Assad government. And so I think ultimately their desire is to see some sort of a Sunni government come to the fore, right next door there in Syria. But obviously, I think they would share in some ways our disgust at the atrocities that have been committed in the name of Islam, and yet they're willing to turn a blind eye if it means the championing of Sunni Islam in the region. But and I think this may ultimately even play into his hand. There's a great saying and a proverb that they use in Turkish that says, which means show people death and they'll gladly welcome malaria. I think he's allowing this horrific scene to play out so that people can see, can get fed up with this, so that when ISIS is ultimately stomped out, which I hope it will soon, he can step into the vacuum, the hole there, and it's going to be left behind, and say, listen, clearly the people in the region is still Islamic, still Muslim. They want a caliph. A caliph is the head of Islam that was deposed in 1923. And ironically, Erdogan and his party always talk about 2023 as a triumph, whatever that means. And I think it has to do with somehow reviving the caliph, reviving this Ottoman Empire, which was decapitated back then. And so this may very well play into his hands. If when ISIS is taken out of commission, he can step into the vacuum and say, listen, the West obviously doesn't have a game plan for the Middle East. They're sick and tired of dealing with their problems, sending their military, coming up empty-handed. And just let the Middle East deal with the Middle East. Let a quasi-democratic leader like Erdogan of whatever union they decide to form, and let them take the show from here on. So this may ultimately continue to play into his hands. Again, whether or not Erdogan himself ends up being some sort of form of antichrist, I don't think he will. He definitely qualifies as the boastful mouth, but I think it's going to take someone with a lot more charm and charisma at the end of the day. But he may very well be preparing the way for something much more horrific at the end.
It's amazing. I love this proverb that you quoted, show the people death and they'll gladly accept malaria. Of course, throughout the Middle East, as so many of the people have seen what ISIS is doing, they've seen death. They've seen the true, brutal face, the unveiled face of Islam. And so we have the opportunity as believers to minister and show them life and show them Jesus Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life. But I think even that principle that that a leader could step forward and say, clearly the people want Islam, they want a caliph, they want a unified Islamic world, but we don't want ISIS. We want something a bit more moderate, and people would just run to that. I think that really could be a likely scenario, and things really, they're moving fast. I mean, it's sort of punctuated in that we see things slow down for a few years and then suddenly, rapidly, there's just this drastic change. And I mean, just since 2011, the entire face of the Middle East, since the Arab Spring, is completely transformed. And in so many ways, I think you would agree, it really is lining up with the general landscape that was described by the biblical prophets. And we as believers, we need to be prepared for the storms that are coming.
I think we need to stay clear from calling names yet, but I think clearly the Bible gives us enough evidence to be watchful and prayerful and to be attentive. And we can see, how many of the nations, for example, listed in Ezekiel 38, they're particularly, listed there, and many of them already very much involved in particularly hatred towards Israel, God's people, Christians, persecution of a lot of that is coming together. And what's interesting, though, is many people thought, Islam was out of commission pre 9/11. And yet, and even after 9/11, many thought, hey, this will surely do it. People will finally wake up and understand this cannot be the religion of a true and loving God. And yet, it's come back with a vengeance. And democracy and Western powers, for all their, for all the promise that they've given to the Middle East, they've come up empty-handed. This is one area, one place they have not been able to succeed in any way, shape, or form. And yet, and in fact, I think they may be coming to a breaking point, where they're willing to just hand it all over to the next highest bidder, which may be Erdogan.
Yeah. Well, listen, Jerry, I think this is all the time that we have for this week. Thank you so much for being with us. We'd love to have you on again. We've been talking about politics and biblical prophecy and all this stuff. I'd love to hear about some of the good things that the Lord's doing. I know I've heard stories of what the Lord's doing through your ministry there in Turkish Cyprus. And I know a lot of people would be encouraged hearing some of those stories. So we'd love to have you on to talk about some of those things as well.
Yes, of course. I'd love to.
All right. Well, Lord bless you. We'll be praying for you and your family. Ask all of our watchers to be praying for Jerry, and that his family would be protected and covered, and that his ministry would be fruitful, and that Jesus would be glorified there in the Islamic world. Amen. Well, folks, that's all the time we have for this week. I want to thank you so much for being with us. Again, remember, there is a storm coming. We don't know if it's this year or a few years down the road, but the scriptures are clear that a storm is coming. Draw close to Jesus. Cling to the hope of the age to come that's laid out for us in the scriptures, that's laid out for us, that Jesus has prepared for us. We have a great inheritance, but in the midst of the storms that are coming, we have to have an anchor that is firm and secure, and it's only Jesus that's going to get us through the days ahead. So draw close to Jesus. I'm Joel Richardson, and this is The Underground.